Hello and welcome to Reader Watch. We are your hosts. I'm Michelle and I'm joined by Ashton.
Hello.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about Twilight.
Oh, yeah.
And when I say Twilight, I mean the 4 books in the main Twilight Saga and then the 5 equivalent movies.
Yeah, just because the movies were heavily based on the 4 books in the main saga, we of course won't be touching on the 3 books that came afterward.
Yes. So read those at your own risk because I have not read them. Ashton, have you read those 3?
Not at all.
So do what you will with that information. So typically I am a reader. In this case, that was exactly how it played out. I read Twilight back when it was the hottest thing off the presses. I read it as an avid fan, all of it so aggressively. I've read it many times in the first couple years of its fame, and I'd only seen the first movie up until this week. Now I've seen all of the movies. So there was quite a bit of time between my first reading the book, my first viewing of the movies, but I read first, as usual.
And I'm typically a watcher. I usually like watching the movies first, although in this case, I actually read the books when it was the hotness on the high school grounds. Don't know what that was. That's a joke for you. That's a joke for you visual listeners. But yeah, in this case, I read the books first before I watched the movies, all of which I had seen upon the releases.
So for those who are not familiar, I don't know how you're not familiar with Twilight, but if you aren't, good for you that you've been able to just, I don't know, ignore the internet forever, maybe. So Twilight is a love story, a monster story, a supernatural story, but love story at its core. It follows our protagonist, Isabella Swan, who is a high school student who transfers to Forks, Washington, to live with her father. And there she meets this just stunning specimen of a boy named Edward Cullen. And we're very soon introduced to the fact that Edward and his entire family are in fact vampires. These vampires do not necessarily follow the normal vampire tropes. They can go out in the sun, they do drink blood, but this particular group of vampires are what they call vegetarians, so they actually only drink animal blood. So it becomes this whirlwind romance between Bella and Edward because he is super thirsty for her blood and also loves her, and she's just enthralled by him and just super in love with him. And the books really cover their relationship as they kind of go against the different obstacles that are both external and internal, with it all culminating with Bella getting her ultimate wish of being with Edward forever.
And let's not forget the love triangle that takes place throughout the entire tetralogy.
Yes, yes, I hate it. But yes, there is in typical young teen book fashion, a la Hunger Games, there is the, of course, typical love triangle. In this case, it is with Bella's best friend, Jacob Black, who is a werewolf, technically a shapeshifter, but we'll get to that later. A werewolf for all intents and purposes right now.
Yeah.
So the love triangle between the 3 of them gets a little wonky, gets a little messy. I'm sure we will discuss it. But it's a very much will she, won't she, who's she going to pick? Are you team Edward? Are you team Jacob? Which was the conversation back in the day when all us young teeny boppers were reading this. What team are you on? You choose your friends based on that because I couldn't be friends with your team Edward. Get out of here. That's team Jacob. So before we dive in, I have to ask you, between Edward, Jacob, what team were you on when you originally read the books?
When I originally read the books,
yes,
because I was that kind of teen angst sort of guy, it was team Edward at the time. How about you?
Team Jacob. He had a special place in my heart. When I first read those, I was I would pick Jacob in a heartbeat. And when we're done our review, I'll let you know who I'd pick now, because as an adult, my choices changed.
Oh, absolutely.
So without further ado, let's get into the main differences between the books and movies. We won't necessarily go book by book. It'll kind of come up as it comes up. So just that's the discussion. If you haven't read or watched these things, you probably won't know what we're talking about. So, or you might, or this is enough for you to avoid reading and watching, and that's your choice as well.
Yeah,
So,
just to keep in mind that it is about the Twilight franchise.
yes, all of the Twilight overall.
All of the Twilight.
So, I want to start. It's hard to pick where to start, but the main thing I truly want to start with would be the difference in the characters in the book versus the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I feel like every character is portrayed slightly differently. So I want to kind of go down the list of the ones that I think are the most dramatic, and we can kind of talk about that. So
yeah,
the most dramatic change, I think everyone would agree, is probably Bella. And the reason for that is because in the books, it's all from her perspective, except for like one little chunk in the final book, Breaking Dawn, which is from Jacob's perspective. So we get a lot more of Bella's thought process and her reasoning of why she makes the choices she does, how she's feeling in the moment, that sort of thing. And while I think Kristen Stewart did her best in the role, it doesn't, like, you're not going to get those inner thoughts, you're not going to get that reasoning, so her character feels really different in the movies because it seems like her being stubborn a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I think that correct me if I'm wrong here, but that is sort of portrayed through the other characters, that's pretty much how they portray Bella. And I mean, that is a problem with turning it into a movie, is that without a running commentary, you're not going to get those inner thoughts. So yeah, I would agree with you there that Bella definitely feels different in the movie. But that's just because you also don't get her inner monologues and her thought processes, and just exactly where she's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. And then going to the next person in my obvious list is Edward. And this is an interesting one because I actually fought with this a lot in my reread, because also I think I'm just going to say this statement, take it how you want. I think the Twilight books happened at a very unique time. I think if these books had come out now, for the age group that they were directed towards, it wouldn't be popular, it wouldn't fly. But it came out when I was like young and naive and like unexperienced romantically. So the things that Edward does in the books are like, oh my god, he's so romantic. Da 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 da. Reading it now, I'm like, this dude is abusive. He is manipulating her and he is gaslighting her. Like, it's not a good relationship, literally at all. But I think the difference. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. As someone who again read them as a little teeny bopper, and now you definitely do get a different perspective from once you're beyond those years.
Exactly. Like, I feel like it comes to a head specifically in New Moon when he returns after she's developed this relationship with Jacob, and he won't let her see him. And that whole, like, the way he manipulates her in the book honestly pissed me off. I was like, how is she accepting that this is a thing? Like, I'm just trying to protect you by like dismantling your car so you can't go visit your friend.
Yeah.
You're not alarmed by that? Like, that's so alarming. So the thing I think that the movies actually do well is they really gloss over that. Like, they don't include that at all. He doesn't seem nearly as manipulative as he does in the book. So it, to me, feels more reasonable that she would end up with him. Because when I think about book Edward, I'm like, why would you pick this absolute dickwad? But then movie Edward, it's like, it's really more focusing on him caring about her and protecting her, but not necessarily like bullying her the way he does in the books. So I think that's a pretty drastic change, but I think it overall actually makes it like more digestible because my god.
Yeah, like the movies do definitely have a more romantic vision of Edward, don't they? Like he's despite him being what he is, he's a bit more of a human,
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. So
and I think we talk about Edward, Bella. I think that has a lot to do with the actors, Kristen Stewart, Robert Pattinson. They do what they do with the characters, and I think they actually do a good job of it, really.
Yeah,
especially in the as the movies go on.
Yeah, this is something that we had talked about when I was first telling Ashton that I had only seen the first movie because I hated it so much I never wanted to watch the other ones. And the difference in quality and in all facets between the first movie and then the remaining movies is significant. Like, the first movie is really not good.
It's very
brutal. And they get better. Like the characters get more believable, the acting gets better, the like visual effects get better, the vampires look better. Like everything levels up as the movies go on. So by the time we get to Breaking Dawn Part 1 and 2, it feels like a movie. Like I had to watch Twilight number 1 over about a week of time. I just had to watch it in chunks because I couldn't. I like my notes are LOL. Like literally I wrote LOL.
There they are.
LOL,
a 2-hour movie,
Edward
mind you.
smells her. LOL, Stephenie Meyer being in the diner. Which like we're gonna let's have a moment for our girl Stephenie Meyer, the author of the books. She was in 2 of the movies. She did some pretty noticeable cameos. If you pay attention, you're like, why is this random person being focused on? Like, why did they cut to this person? Yeah, that's the author for everyone who knows. So in Twilight the movie, she is the Stephenie at the diner. Here's your plate of veggies, Stephenie. And then they give her a plate of vegetables like in the diner. That's the author. And then at the wedding of Edward and Bella, it cuts to this lady that has no relevance to the story. That's good old Stephenie Meyer again. So
yeah, so in case you wanted to see the author in the movie, there you go. There's a chance. Twice.
Yeah, that's what she looks like. There you go. Like that's the lady who brought this upon the world, who unleashed this masterpiece.
Unleashed this.
Well, honestly, like as much like flack as I want to give these books, and I'm absolutely going to, she did a lot. Like at the time, the phenomenon that was Twilight is actually like insane. It's not, of course, like Harry Potter level, but as far as book to movie adaptations go, like Twilight is iconic.
Yeah,
absolutely iconic.
I don't think it's an understatement to say that, you know, for as much flack as people give Twilight, that it is in its own sort of way cultural staple in the sense of, say, you know, film adaptations and especially what's the word I'm looking for here, young adult fiction.
Yeah,
you know, it's one of those things that you easily saw things you saw like affecting how things were done from that point forward. So
yeah, it paved the way for like Hunger Games, Maze Runner, like all the adaptations we're starting to see now. Like Twilight really paved the way for those, I think.
Yeah,
so
I think
we'll give it that. We'll give it that.
I'll give you those props.
Just little props. So moving to the next character, I think in this just lineup, we have Jacob Black. Yeah, my boy Jake. Love him in the book, don't love him in the movie, unfortunately. I think in their attempt to create more romance between Edward and Bella and focus on that relationship, Jake got sidelined. It never felt like in the movie he was a viable option for Bella. Whereas in the books, it felt like he was a viable option.
Yeah.
Because in the movie, he's just like a petulant child. They remove a lot of the good qualities about him and a lot of like the conversations he has with Bella that aren't dramatic and aren't fights and aren't negative. A lot of that I think is lost for time, reasonably so. And we know like she's not going to pick him in the end because he gets another option.
Yeah, and like mind you, like they are, which we'll touch on later.
Yeah,
but yeah, and like they are already pushing the runtime with like 2-hour movies. So again, the nature of adaptation and all that. And like I don't know, he definitely does get his moments of being personable. You do get that from like, you know, from him, from Lautner's performance. But I mean, it's like you say, there's just not enough time to develop him as the character he should have been in the books.
Yeah. And one thing I can't not talk about this, because this is something Ashton and I talked about when we were just watching the movies and reading the books, is Taylor Lautner specifically. So this dude was 16 years old in the first movie. And then, because the first movie came out in 2008, the second movie came out in 2009. So he's 16, 17. This dude, this poor young child, like he is young. Like think about that age, unless you're watching this and you're 16 and you're like, that's not young. But anyone older than that, think about who you were when you were 16. This young guy got thrust into a world of older women lusting after him. He was voted one of the sexiest men at like 16, 17 years old.
Yeah.
And then all the pressure that went with that. Like there's been a lot of interviews and things with him of like, how did you handle being a sex symbol at 16? I think it's becoming more of a conversation. Like with the Britney Spears documentary, there was a lot of conversation around like how old she was when she became a sex symbol. Taylor Lautner is the male equivalent of that. And I think that's really interesting, and nobody really talks about that, because watching the movies, I'm like, he's set up to be like physically attractive. Like he's jacked, he's muscular, he looks so good. And then you see like Edward, he looks like a dead thing. And like that, like specifically in what is it, Eclipse? No, New Moon, I think, when like you got lots of shirtless Taylor Lautner, and then you get a little shirtless Pattinson. There you go. Pattinson. You get shirtless Pattinson, and you can't help but be like, ooh. Not quite the same. I think there's something to be said for just like the impact that role actually had on him, because he's done stuff since then, but he like kind of transitioned into being a regular dude for a while after that because of all the pressure. And I respect that, and I feel sad for him, because I think he was a really good part of the movie. Like his acting, not just his body, was impressive.
Yeah, he was definitely one of the acting highlights for me anyway. Like, you know, he sold the character for me, and you know, for as rocky as say some of the directions have been, I don't know if there was a moment when he really failed to sell the emotional character that's going through at that point in the story.
Totally, I completely agree. So now let's just talk about some of our favorite casting, our favorite characters, because there is a huge cast in the books and the movies, and they nailed some of these people.
Oh yeah. And even like, you know, not even getting into like the characters themselves, because full disclosure, I've always held that Twilight as a franchise is a story about unremarkable main characters surrounded by insanely fascinating side characters. So we'd be here for 6 hours if I just didn't stop myself. But yeah, like there's a number of characters to talk about. Charlie, like he is like Billy Burke sells that dad character, and like even on like as a character himself, like he's really fascinating to watch, like how he reacts to everything that's going forward. And you know, even the dad of the Cullens, Carlisle, he's a great character. I think was it Peter
Casanelli?
Yeah, last name I can never remember.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, cast list this big, I hope you'll forgive me that much.
We're going to get a lot of the cast names wrong. I'm going to be referring to the Wikipedia a lot, but that's not to say they're not talented. There's just too many of them.
Yeah, like as the father figures, Carlisle and I'm just going to refer to them as characters. Carlisle and Charlie were very interesting for me to watch. And even like, you know, just see them in the book, watch them in the movie. Those ones were always very interesting to me. I know there were certain members of the Cullens that stuck out to us. Jasper,
yes,
who was played by Jackson Rathbone, I believe.
Good old Sokka.
Yeah.
Oh, that's disappointing.
But yeah, another great character. I think Rathbone does a great job of portraying just what that character is kind of portrayed to be in the books, especially after the first movie.
When he's actually given time, like screen time and lines, he's perfect as Jasper, because Jasper has this really nuanced and complicated backstory that they don't have time to go into fully in the movies. And like, I get it and I respect it. They do enough, I think, that it makes sense why his character behaves the way he does. The only gripe I have with it is in Breaking Dawn, the book, he has a lot of issues around how well Bella's doing as a newborn, because he did so poorly as one. And he has this like existential crisis in the book that's really, really powerful, and like they don't even remotely touch on it. There's like this tiny nugget of a scene where he has to leave the room in the movie, and there's no explanation behind it. There's nothing really there, but like the thought process from the book behind that is huge, because he, when he was a newborn, was raised in this world of murder and hate, and he's slaughtering humans left, right, and center. And he kind of wants Bella to like not necessarily fail, but struggle with being a newborn, so he won't feel so bad, because he's the newest member of the Cullen family until Bella comes around. And when he sees her just thriving as a vampire, he kind of has to question, like, was I weak? Like, why did I experience things the way I experienced them? And I just think, like, that to me is huge. And I think, like, the actor would have been able to kill that if that was allowed to be put on screen.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
that would have been amazing. It would have been also
Yeah.
so dark though.
Oh,
Like,
100%.
Twilight is surprisingly dark for what it actually is. Like, the
Yeah.
backstories of the Cullens in particular, besides my boy Emmett, who just died because he decided to fight a bear. True. Which is, like, very, very in line with his character. But everyone else's backstory is so unbelievably dark and very, like, overshadowed by, like, the melodrama of Bella and Edward's relationship.
Oh yeah, and even like when you go into the backstories of other characters, I think of the Volturi, you know, this top of the chain vampire government. Like they have they have their own little dark backstory as well. And then you get into like the Denalis or you know, everyone else.
Everyone else, every other vampire character. Or even I let me rephrase, every other supernatural character. Because the backstory of, like, Jacob and the werewolves, I'm gonna keep doing quotations because it's a revelation in the final book that they're actually shapeshifters. They're not werewolves. The form they choose just happens to be a werewolf, based on, like, the Spirit Warrior story, which is a beautiful story they don't do justice to in the movie, literally at all, because it's such a sick story. But I digress. But the whole backstory and, like, the legends of the werewolves / shapeshifters is really glossed over. Not much time is spent into it. Like, the only time spent on it is to feed the vampire story.
Yeah, like these movies are
disappointing.
Yeah, these movies are primarily about the vampire dramas, not so much the. I'm just gonna keep saying, for all intents and purposes, the werewolves.
Yeah.
But yeah, they are primarily vampire movies, which I can kind of get why they were glossed over. But at the same time, yeah, you do love to you would have loved to have seen more of that, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I mean, obviously I was team Jacob, so, like, any more Jacob would have been cool. But I found their stories just, I don't know, really fascinating. Like, the idea of the legends and the passed down through the generations, to me, which is really interesting. Seeing the impact that the vampires have on the werewolves and the tribes and how they really relate to each other. Like, that to me is just fascinating, and they don't really do enough, like, with the nuances of that, unfortunately. Because, like, they gloss. So I'm mad about a lot of things, but as it relates to the werewolves, the thing that they really, really gloss over is how devastating it is to become a werewolf. They don't really do that in the movies. They're like, oh, it's so fun, yay! Like, even in Breaking Dawn, in the final movie, when suddenly the youngest kids in the tribe are becoming werewolves, just like that one kid turns into a werewolf and Jacob's right there, like, it's all good. And then they're laughing and having a good time. Absolutely not. It's a devastating process. It's absolutely terrifying. It wrecks your family. And it's heavily alluded in the books that Harry Clearwater, so Seth and Leah's dad, who dies in the movies from a heart attack because of Victoria, it's heavily alluded that he died of a heart attack because both his kids changed. Like, that's what actually is supposed to happen to him, because the devastation, I think it's primarily of Leah becoming a wolf, because she's the only female. Like, there's no females in the legend to ever become wolves, so her becoming one is very, like, traumatic for the entire family.
Yeah, another thing that gets glossed over in the movies, by the way.
Oh my gosh, so glossed. Like, she just seems like an asshole in the movies. She is such a beautifully nuanced character in the books, and I'm so devastated that she doesn't get her justice, like, at all in the movie, because her and Jacob end up having this, like, really healthy, unhealthy relationship, because they're both, like, really damaged in a similar way. Her because of Sam, her ex-boyfriend, like, leaving her because he imprinted on her cousin, and then Jacob with his, like, wanting of Bella, can't have her, that thing. So they have this, and because also glossed over pretty heavily in the books, the wolves can be in each other's minds. Like, they constantly get each other's thoughts when they're in wolf form. So they know each other on a level that no one else will ever know them. So they're able to relate through their pain because they both physically feel it together. And that's just so glossed over, and it's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, in the movies, it kind of comes across as more of like a telepathy sort of thing, like we can talk to each other when we want to. But yeah, it is like
Exactly.
it's way more than that in the books, and
Yeah,
it's such a shame that there's so much that gets glossed over in the movies in terms
no.
of the werewolves.
I know. Just give me like the werewolf movie. Like just like give me the same movies, which is all of it from werewolf perspective. That would be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
So I feel like we got to keep going with the characters because like these books are that's what it is. Like it's the
yeah.
characters. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about our girl Alice
Oh yeah, that was a
because
character.
she yeah, go ahead.
Like, well, that was like a fascinating character because she has like this future vision, which I mean that's a pretty self-explanatory power, but like Ashley Green, like the way she's portrayed in the movie, I actually really liked how she came across. You know, like she really sells her as a likable character. I mean, even Charlie likes her by like what was that, New Moon? I want to say, or is that
Yeah.
Eclipse?
Yeah,
Yeah,
New Moon. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's fading from my memory already.
I know, it's like which one's which one? I get them confused. The naming is just stupid to me. It's called it Twilight 1, 2, 3, 4. Like,
But yeah,
but
like Alice is a supremely fascinating character, and another one that has like one of those fascinating backstories.
yeah. Her backstory unfortunately gets 100% cut from the movies,
Yeah.
which I think is a little bit disappointing because of the similarities that could have been between Bella and Edward. So, for those who aren't super well versed in the crazy backstories of the Twilight characters, in the first movie, there is the antagonist vampire James, played by Cam Gigandet, and his whole thing is that he's a tracker. Like his skill, his magical ability is that he can track. He can find you. That is his thing. Whatever. It is revealed that he had actually encountered Alice before, and she is the only person to ever have escaped him. And the reason that she escaped him is because another vampire had saved her. So she was a human girl who was crazy because she was having like future vision. She got stuck in an asylum and James was after her. So in order to save her from James, this other unnamed vampire turned her and left her there. So she has no memories of her human life. She just wakes up, sees a vision of her with the Cullens and with Jasper, and she's like, cool, I guess I'm gonna go there. Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
And she was actually to James what Bella was to Edward in terms of the irresistible blood. Like her human Alice was that to James. And that's
Hmm.
the only other time they refer to anyone as being like that person's person. What?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bit nuts. Like especially that never would have made it into the movies. Like you don't even get a hint of where Alice came from.
Yeah, none of it. It's so sad. You get pretty much everyone else's story to some degree of the main Cullen clan, except for Alice, even though she is the Cullen, besides
Yeah.
Edward, with the most screen time, which I
Hmm.
find really interesting.
Yeah. It really is. Like you even get some of Carlisle's background,
Mm-hmm.
and mind you, like I'm I'm not one to say no to anyone's background in that franchise because again they are all of them fascinating characters. Um, but at the same time, yeah, I do agree that it is crazy that Alice has never got it in there
Yeah,
because it's such a crazy parallel.
it's interesting because then it in the movies it seems like this relationship, this like I don't know what to call it. It's called Bella is Edward's singer because her blood sings for him. Like that's the phrasing for it. It's just
Mhm.
like her blood is the only blood that is the most irresistible to him. And they
Mhm.
don't they mention it and then they're just like that, yeah, that's a thing. But they don't really talk about other times that's happened for somebody or what that encounter truly is. Like it's really interesting. And I think by glossing over that, they don't actually do justice to Edward's self control. Because it's not just he's
Yeah.
hanging out with a human, he's hanging out with a human that feels like she's specifically designed for him to drink
Hmm.
and like murder. And he kind of says it in that line of like, you're my own personal brand of heroin, but it doesn't have that impact. It's not addressed again. Like,
Hmm.
he's just suddenly like cool with her blood and with like touching her, and it's like, we're good, it's fine. But it's this immense self-control. It's like painful to him to be around her. So when she does eventually get turned into a vampire, we don't get to see as much of that relief from him, because he's like, it's safe now. Like, I won't murder you. But that's just me complaining about everything, because that's,
I mean,
how I do.
to be fair, there's a bit to complain about with this franchise, but for as much as we're talking about what they did right, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I know that both of us had a thing with Renesmee.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So
Bella's half human, half vampire daughter.
yes. Okay, so here's my problem. Why is it that the werewolves look more realistic than the freaking baby?
Oh yeah.
Like, the baby, to me, I'm like, that's fake looking. The wolves, I'm like, yeah, that's a wolf. Like, that doesn't make sense. The baby's supposed to be beautiful, but it's half human, half vampire. If you're able to portray the vampires as real actors, then why can't you portray a half vampire, half human as a real baby, and not this mutant thing?
It's also nuts, cause especially considering that that's the same the same set of movies where like they CGI thinned out Kristen Stewart for her deterioration.
Let's have a moment for that. Holy moly, they nailed it. They nailed it.
Like,
it doesn't come across nearly enough in the books, in my opinion, because it's kind of talked about through Jacob that she looks terrible and this and that, but to see it actually, oh my god, she looks nasty.
Yeah.
And
like, that's
and it looked good.
The CG, that was all CGI, right? Like, and it was like that department knocked it out of the park in like, in terms of doing that character that way, because like it's almost visceral is what it is, especially they get to the end of Breaking Dawn Part 1 when like she has her fall.
Yeah. Oh, nasty.
Yeah.
Even the scene right before that, when she's about to take a bath and you see her remove her robe and you see her from behind, and just the cut like of her shoulder blades and like her spine sticking out, like, it looks inhuman. Like, she looks so skeletal, and it's perfect. Like, it looks believably disgusting.
Oh yeah, and I think this kind of comes back to something we talked about earlier, and that, like, I mean, the production value for the movies, it really does, like, each one is a step up from the last one. You know, like, obviously, like, from Twilight to New Moon, that is night and day. But like, by the time you get to Breaking Dawn, it's like you said, they're almost proper blockbusters. And, like, the visual effects department just keeps getting better and better as the movies go on.
Oh, absolutely.
And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the music.
Do it.
Like not just the the licensed soundtracks or whatever from whatever bands they bring in, or whoever songs they bring in, which are fantastic as playlists, but also the score, like from where you get to Twilight to where you get like the more ominous tunes in Breaking Dawn. Like, the soundtrack, it just gets better and better every time as well. And like, I'm a sucker for a good soundtrack, and obviously, but like, yeah, like that's like, if you do stick with the movies, like, it gets better on a production value.
Oh, significantly.
Yeah.
Just the scale on which they're creating things, it goes up. Like, you go up from, you got the one wolf, you're seeing Jacob on screen, he looks decent, like, it's believable, and then you see, like, the final scene, and you have, I think, like 14, 15 wolves on screen. You have like just so much happening, and everything looks good. Like, it looks, I mean, that movie came out in 2011, 2012, right? So like, they're older at this point, they still hold up.
Oh,
they're still believable enough to be passable as movies, I guess.
Yeah. Which, speaking of that scene, that, like, because the Breaking Dawn Part 2, at the end of Breaking Dawn the book, there's this almost culmination between vampire witnesses with the werewolves backing them up, and the Volturi and their witnesses meeting on like this open plain, which is a scene from the books which fell flat for me, because it was almost like leading up to something that just didn't happen. The way it's executed in the movies, however, it became worth it. You know what I mean?
Well, I think the notable, like, besides everything we've already discussed, a very, very notable difference between the books and the movies. There is not a single action sequence in the books because Bella doesn't witness anything. She's passed out when the Cullens fight James. There's no fight when they visit the Volturi in Italy. She is not there for the confrontation between the newborns and the Cullens / wolves. She only witnesses the Victoria fight there. So there's a mild action scene there. And then there is no full-blown confrontation in Breaking Dawn.
Yeah.
This is where the movie completely does kind of its own thing, but also not its own thing, because it does a little bait and switch with us. Of course, we have our good buddy Alice, who can see the future.
Yeah.
And it was a choice for them to show the viewers in full what her vision was. So that's what the final confrontation in Breaking Dawn actually is. It's a vision. Just kidding. It's not real. But because up to this point that it has never been shown in that way, the reaction that I had when I saw that fight, because I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I just read the book. I know there's not a full confrontation. I know no one dies. I know it's all happy ending. I was distraught. Like, actually, like, it hurt my soul, because you see, like, they don't shy away from killing your favorite characters in that fight. Like it starts with Carlisle dying.
Yeah.
Like, and this is a character that in book and movie is non-violent. He does not want to fight. He is a pacifist. He is such a beautiful, peaceful character.
Yeah.
And you see him, like, he engages in the fight. Like, he get, like, the Volturi grab Alice. They're gonna kill her or take her or whatever. And he goes to fight. And he just gets straight up murdered immediately. Like, doesn't even, there's no battle. There's no fight. He just is dead.
Oh,
and then it just deteriorates from there. Like, I knew it was going to happen because you'd made the joke, and I actually didn't connect this. You accidentally kind of spoiled this for me, but thank God you did, because you'd made a joke about Seth dying. And I was like, I know Seth doesn't die because he's my favorite freaking character. He is the precious small being that every other character talks about how pure and good he is. I know they don't kill him. They kill him in that fight. And he dies just so tragically. Like, he gets his wolfy head snapped, and then you see Wolf Leah's reaction, and, like, to me, that type of a sibling reaction or a parent reacting to a child death will set me off. Like, that is the thing that just breaks my soul. I was like, I'm watching stupid Twilight movies and I'm getting emotional over the wolves getting emotional. Like, when I see Leah Wolf get mad, I'm like, you get them, Leah, you go, you avenge your little brother.
Them actually doing the final battle, they go off. Like, almost every character who has been in the series to that point, like, who's on that field, they have a moment. You know, whether that's kicking ass or just getting wrecked.
Yeah, it gives you, like, it's a lot of, I would not necessarily fan service because they murder our faves, but it gives you all the things you've kind of been hoping were going to happen when you've seen these confrontations and you've seen, like, these, oh, maybe they're going to fight, maybe they're not going to fight. That scene gives you all of that. You get to see, not to the fullest extent, but to, like, the best of their ability. You get to see the full power of the gifted vampires.
Yeah.
So seeing Benjamin, Rami Malek, cool.
Yeah.
Seeing him split the ground with that big fissure, and then just like the lava at the bottom, that was insane. Like, excuse me, is he the Avatar? Because I thought for some reason I remembered him as just an Earthbender, but then he's also doing fire. Like, he's doing it's like controlling all the elements. Yeah, that is the most overpowered. Are you joking? Like, forget Alice. I want Benjamin. Like, he's crazy powerful. Like, you get to see them really, really do that, and you get to see Zafrina do her, like, visual hallucinations. You get to see, I forget, it's not Tanya, but her sister. Is that Alina? No, I'm trying to remember.
No.
Either way, one of the Denali sisters has, like, the electricity power, and you get to see her really, really use that as well. And like, even though it's such a bait and switch and it doesn't make sense for reasons I'll get into, that fight scene, yes, I loved it. I loved it I liked it when it rewound and I knew it wasn't real. That I liked it. The thing I will say, like, that doesn't work for that There's very clear established rules to how Alice's visions work. And the two key things in those visions, she can't see the wolves and she can't see Renesmee. She can't see them. Anytime they're involved in something, she doesn't see that future anymore, which was the whole reason New Moon happened the way it did, because Bella jumped off the cliff and she couldn't see Jacob save her at all, period. So how did Alice have a vision of a huge fight, which was like 50% werewolf, and then also see like the vision of Renesmee just like growing up and living a happy life? She literally would not have been able to see those things.
Yeah, there's definitely like some very like those I would say are very fan service decisions that are made in this for the sake of the movie.
Yeah.
And like on a pure movie sense, yeah, I get it. But yeah, it does kind of break some key rules there.
Yeah. I wish there had been a middle ground where the altercation that happens in the book, which is more of a mental fight because it's Bella using her shielding powers against Jane and Alec. I wish there'd been like a slight physical fight in that. So it still happened, but just not to like this all out war. I think that would have sat better with me, as opposed to like, here's a vision of all your faves getting murdered. Just kidding. So this is something that happens in both the book and the movie that had a lot of fans pissed off, rightfully so, I think. So in the final book, we get an explanation for why Jacob and Bella have been so attached this whole time, besides their friendship. It's actually because Bella was growing a little baby Renesmee the whole time. And Jacob was just waiting to imprint on a little baby. So
just waiting genetically to imprint on a fetus.
Straight up. So for those who I guess don't necessarily know or also don't pay as much attention in the books, because it's very glossed over in the movies, imprinting is when a werewolf meets the love of his life. And it's a her, because at this point all wolves are men. So when he meets her, every other tether that ties him to the earth is cut, and she's the only thing that ties him to the earth. Like, that is the description. Their world, his world, is her. He would do anything, be anything for her. In the first couple of books, we've seen wolves that have imprinted. In the case of Sam, he's imprinted on Emily, who is his age. They are a functioning adult relationship that is consenting and safe. Then we see Quill. I'm trying to think. We see one of one of Jacob's best friends imprint on a child. Quill? Yeah, he imprints on a child who's 2 years old and then 3 years old, because there's a conversation of, oh, she's in her terrible twos. Oh no, she just turned 3. So he's imprinted on this child. So his whole thing is he's going to be whatever this baby needs. I'm going to be your babysitter. I'm going to be your brother until you're old enough. And then we're going to continue the Wolfie line.
Yeah.
There is a conversation in the book that does not happen in the movie that makes us very, very, very problematic. Jacob and Leah are having a conversation of why they think imprinting happens. And Jacob thinks it is to strengthen the wolf genes, because it's pointed out that Sam and Jacob, the two alphas, the two biggest wolves, are bigger than any of the wolves that have ever come before them. So imprinting is actually to like genetically enhance the line. Therefore, imprinting is for recreation, sexy time purposes. Think about that when he imprints on a newborn fetus baby.
Yeah, it gets into very weird areas once you actually start to analyze it in those respects.
Yeah, it's like the legends are so good, and then they do that. As I honestly think it was Stephenie Meyer's way of like being like, oh, I made Jacob, and he's such a cool character, and I don't want to like lose him. What's my excuse to have him around? Yeah, the baby. Why not?
Yeah, little baby girlfriend.
Nasty. Nasty. I hate it in both the book and movie. It's both bad in both.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And actually, so speaking of the legends and touching on all the werewolf stuff or whatever, I think especially I don't know, I think I would be very remiss not to touch on the Quileute tribe and the way they're handled in the movie, because I had vastly different reactions over the course of the past decade plus now that this franchise has been out. And I mean, myself as a First Nations Nations guy, audio listeners, hello. Um, 'Cause I know that when this I know that when this franchise first came out, and I think in some ways I still have the general reaction of that being a sort of step forward as far as representation goes. Because up to that point, I just didn't see myself in movies like that. It was probably one of the first stories in a major blockbuster series where you saw First Nations characters who are majorly who are by the vast majority played by First Nations actors like Taylor Lautner, Graham Greene, um, who
My boy Seth, played by Boo Boo. His first name is Boo Boo, and I
yeah,
adore him.
it's amazing. But yeah, like these characters in this sort of franchise who have human stories, who have human characters. So it's not about like say the stereotypical images that you've seen in for First Nations people in the past. It's not uh, Howdy Chief or not to get into more serious subjects here. It's say the drunk living on a poverty-ridden reservation. It's like you've alluded to in the past. There's romance. There's actual human romance. There's character that's developed. So I think in a way, Twilight will always have that sort of soft spot for me. But at the same time, it's hard not to recognize that there's a ton of appropriation that happens on Stephanie Meyer's side, in terms of say taking Quilliad legends and or even like the Quilliad people themselves and moving them into this sort of franchise. Being the emotionally driven supernatural beast in these things. We turn into wolves when we're angry. You know,
Mm.
that's another joke for your
sure.
audio listeners. And I mean, even going beyond that, to my knowledge, I don't know how much royalties the Quilliad tribe themselves have even gotten from the Twilight franchise. I know that was a hot topic for a good while, shortly after the final movie's release, anyway. So I don't know. I've always had this sort of complicated relationship with Twilight, and that it's it's Native people having human storylines in a major blockbuster franchise. That's not, say, you know, the one superhero who's a tracker in X-Men.
Ooh, I can't even think of who that is.
I'm blanking on his name. Yeah, you see my point.
Yeah.
And actually, for that matter, I think Suicide Squad had um, I'm blanking on his last name. Adam Beach was in Suicide Squad, and he was barely in there.
Mm.
So I don't know. Like it was. I mean, again, Native characters who actually have human storylines. Jacob is his own character. Seth is his own character. But at the same time, it is a weird one, just for those reasons I've listed before.
Yeah. That's so
So,
interesting.
that in mind, our ultimate elephant in the room. After all this time, Team Edward or Team Jacob?
After all this time, team neither of them. So my werewolf boyfriend, not actually boyfriend, because he's a literal child. So just the character I like the best with the wolves is Seth Clearwater. He is a spectacular character in both book and movie. I adore his precious little face. I love him. And then my vampire, see, okay, I had a different opinion before I finished the last movie. Because before that, my vampire boyfriend would be Jasper, because I adore him. But actually, it's Garrett.
Garrett, really?
Garrett. There's something about him that I'm not gonna lie. I'm like, he's an attractive man. Like it's Lee Pace.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and
Lee Pace.
He looks great. Like, and he's actually a great character in the book. He gets this really epic speech at the end that doesn't happen in the movie. With the speech, like I'm picturing him doing a speech. I'm like, yes, I love his character and the way he comes in being a human killing vampire and he leaves being a vegetarian. I
Yeah.
love that for him. And he finds his girl. He's like, I will follow to the end of the earth, woman. I'm like, oh my God, say that to me. So that's my man. I'm Team Garrett and Team Seth.
You know what? I think I definitely agree with you on the werewolf side. Although, like, I have a hard soft spot for Jacob in some respects, but Seth is the go-to. He's an absolute, he's a cinnamon roll is what he is. Sweet little boy. Um, and my vampire is actually Alice, just
Hmm,
because I love her character. I love the way she's portrayed in the movies. She's just great. She's a delight anytime she's on screen.
she is. She's
Okay,
precious as
but
well.
if for some reason no one else was born in this timeline, this timeline, if you will, and you had to choose Edward or Jacob, you used to be Team Edward. What are you
No,
now?
I used to be
Oh,
Team
sorry, yeah,
Jacob.
you used to be Team Jacob. Who are you now?
I'd still be Team Jacob. Old
Okay,
habits die hard, my friend.
yeah, you know what? I used to be Team Edward. After revisiting the characters where I am now, I would agree with you, Team Jacob. If I just say,
Yay!
yeah, but of course, the reason we have these discussions, the entire reason we're here to begin with, is the ultimate question: if somebody was totally new to Twilight, had no idea about it somehow, would you tell them to read it first or watch it first?
I would tell them to watch it first. It feels like a
Really,
betrayal to me a little bit.
Miss Reader?
Honestly, I know I love reading and I'm a reader, and these books were hard to read. I struggled to get through them this time. They don't hold the same magic they used to. We live in a different time where it doesn't necessarily hold up. So I would say watch the movie first. If you're really intrigued by any of the side characters, then maybe you'll want to slog through the books. But like the books are a lot. Like
There they
they're a
are.
lot. They're huge. Like that's heavy. And they're
Mhm.
not the most fun to read, truthfully, because they're not that action packed. It's all about that like weird, gross relationship between Edward and Bella that doesn't work
Mhm.
in these times. So watch the
That's
movies,
really interesting.
maybe read the books. Also, I feel like as a woman, my opinion's slightly different because I'm more troubled by how problematic Edward is, I think.
Oh yeah, he's hella problematic in both iterations, really.
Mhm. What about you? Same question.
Uh, I think this one was a lot easier for me, just because I would agree that the books are hard to get through. Even as someone who's usually all for the sort of like, you know, the love triangle, who will she pick, and all that, vampires, werewolves. Um, I would say watch first. Um, I mean, especially in respect to, like, even I'm not going to say that watching the first Twilight movie is easy, but they do get better from that point forward. um, and I would agree with Michelle in the respect that if any of the characters catch your attention, if you want to get more into just what makes who they are. I mean, we've talked about how much backstory there actually is to these side characters. Uh, if you're particularly caught by the characters and you really want to know more, then read them. But otherwise, I would say watch the movies.
We did it. That's it. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe. Let us know if there's anything else you want us to read and watch and talk about and dissect immensely. Of course, I have been Michelle. I have been joined by Ashton, and we will see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.